and I am a licensed professional clinical counselor as well as a licensed school counselor in the state of Ohio. I also serve as assistant professor at Oakland University.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, I am Kashal Karnas and I am a play therapist and I currently practice with both children and I work with parents doing filial as well. And I am at Root and Blossom Counseling in Atlanta.
Perfect. Thank you, Cashel. So to just get us started, we would love for each of you to tell us a little bit about yourself and the current clinical work that you do. This can include populations. It can also include clinical issues that you tend to see in your clinical practice and or areas of interest that you have within the clinical field. And we're going to start with Dr. Osloos, and then we'll move to Cashel.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you so much. I did want to share just a brief part of my background that helps inform who I am today, which is I have experience in school counseling, which led me into clinical counseling, but I have a passion for working with counselors in schools, working with students in schools. And so that informs a lot of my work as well currently. So right now I am seeing a lot of clients virtually. I work with youth and adolescents and families. Many of my populations are LGBTQ, so queer and trans youth and adolescents and their families. That has kind of become a niche for me. And when I'm thinking about kind of geographically, like where I am and positioning to major cities and things like that, I find that I have clients that come from, you know, quite a ways away to seek services, particularly for those specific populations. So a lot of the work I'm do now is with queer and trans youth and families. And it's really salient work, of course, because many of you know we have a lot of socio-political issues. We have legislative actions that have been taken against our particularly trans youth, right? So working in a space that is really important. And I think that that's the space I'm currently operating. So it is a private practice. And yeah, that's where I am right now. I'm sure we'll dive into more topics as we go.
Yes, we will. Thank you so much, Cashel.
Hey everyone. So I also was a school counselor for 8 years and that's how I got started. And absolutely loved the work that I was doing. And I loved working not only with helping and supporting children, but also working with their families and helping them to connect. And I have really transitioned now into private practice and doing that as well. So I work with ages 5 to 15, although some of my kiddos are now 18 years old because they've been with me for a few years. But that's who I primarily work with. And then I do filial work with parents where I train them how to do play therapy at home with their kids, how to connect, how to do co-regulation. I would say that I work with a wide array of concerns or issues that kiddos are brought to me for, but I would say a lot of ADHD, anxiety, how to help them to learn how to regulate. And then I also work with, I find a lot of LGBTQ plus kiddos as well are brought to me, and those are through referrals and also through my time as a school counselor. So now I just tend to work with that population as well, and I absolutely love it. So yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. So for those of you that are school counselors and school counseling programs, let this serve as an example for you that you have a wide array of skills that can be used in a lot of different areas as evidenced by both of our panelists today. Amanda, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Okay. So, Michelle, we'll start back with you. So our question to both of you is if you could go back to start your career and tell yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
That's an excellent question. I would say having confidence within yourself is a really important piece because you don't have to have all the answers, and you can say, don't I don't have that answer for you right now. But I can find out, and I can ask some questions, and giving yourself some space because it takes quite a few years to grow and to learn. Um, I feel like as a school counselor, year 3 or 4, I was finally like, oh, okay. So to be patient with yourself and have that understanding. I know when I got out of grad school, I was like, I'm gonna hit the ground running. I'm gonna do all these things. And it's important to not put too much pressure on yourself, and strike that balance of, yeah, you're very passionate and you want to do all the things, and also you have to take time to really like learn and grow in the profession.
That's great advice. And I think you're right. Sometimes when we first get into the field, we feel like we should know everything. But like you said, we need to allow ourselves the opportunity and space to continue to grow and learn, and not expect ourselves to always have all the answers. I always say kids just want to be loved. So if we're building a relationship, that's equally as important as um, being open to exploring to find the answer, right? So we just, if we don't always have the answer, focus on the relationship and we're still doing okay. I love that advice. Thank you for that. Clark, we'll jump to you. And if you could go back, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I love this question. So some of the themes that Kashel was speaking to um, rang true for me. And I think one of the biggest pieces is being yourself, like being your authentic self. I wish I would have said that to myself and held true to that throughout my development. Um, I think that in this profession, we have a lot of times like people we look up to, or just the way this is, we tend to feel like frauds a lot, or we have that imposter phenomenon that some of us experience. And what I found is it's okay that I'm kind of weird and funny and have great hair, and I'm a good counselor and a good counselor educator as well. And so you can be all of the things and be yourself. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm still learning. I'm still learning every day, right? So yeah, I think to speak to Kashel's point too, like um, I don't think I'm done. I mean, I'm not done learning. I'm not. I don't. When you're like, you're the experts, I was like, where are they? I can't wait to see them on the screens. I don't consider myself an expert in that way, right? So I think that we're always learning, and I think that's a really important piece for your development as a counselor, professional helper.
Same, forever learners.
Well, we talk to our kids all the time about having a growth mindset, and we need to embrace that philosophy as well, right? That we have that growth mindset as counselors, that we're still growing and learning with each setting and with each client, and with each year. So that's wonderful advice. Thank you both.
I also just think that that's so relevant to working with children and adolescents. They go through so many phases of life in which there's change and growth and development involved in what they do. And I think about myself during that time, and what I wouldn't have wanted is to come to somebody who was unwilling to tell me, like, I make mistakes too, and I'm not perfect. And so I'm so open with kids when I like just get it wrong or I'm having a weird, silly day. I've seen it really improve the therapeutic relationship. So I appreciate that you both like have that sense of humor and willingness to like joke and be authentic to yourself, because I think that that's such a great way to build a therapeutic alliance with children. Um, so we talked about like kind of the high point of like be yourself, do this work and do it in a way that feels pertinent to who you are. In that same vein, though, sometimes there are challenges that come up in the work that we do. And so we're going to start with Clark on this question. But what do you find to be the most challenging aspect of your work?
Yeah. Um, so a couple things. One thing that comes to mind for me is, as someone who holds an identity within our LGBTQ communities and is working with folks within the LGBTQ communities, um, I can experience a little bit more, like a little increased burnout, a little bit more, um, secondary traumatic stress, those types of things when you're talking about some of the issues that folks bring up. So I think for me, it's being careful, just being careful and cautious and doing the things that I need to do to keep myself well. And um, so that specific piece, I think, is can be challenging at times when you're working with populations and within a population. And so that's one thing that comes to mind for me. And then another thing I think about when working with youth specifically, I know we have a question maybe later on, particularly about guardians or families. But I think that one of the first things that I didn't really necessarily think about, which doesn't make any sense because families are a part of working with children, right? But I thought, I guess I forgot that was a part of it. So I think initially the challenges for me related to working with the family systems. And I think part of it had to do, ready for my whole diagnosis, but I am an only child. And so I think a lot of times that impacted how I saw therapy and things. So I had to really work on my engagement with families and how to like appropriately engage them in the process because they are part of that. They're an important part, can be an important part. And I think another little caveat to that is sometimes with the populations I work with, we may have really invalidating, unaffirming parents or guardians. So that relationship also is challenging. Working with them, really promoting the client's autonomy, but and empowering them. But there's the legal piece. So I would say those are a few things that come to mind. I know you said one challenging thing.
No, but I appreciate you noting a couple. And our next question is kind of about working with parents and caregivers after we speak with Kashel. But I think like a great thing to note, I tell my students when I teach the child and adolescent class, I tell them, I'm glad you're here wanting to work with children and adolescents. You are also going to be working with adults every single day. So I hope that you recognize you're going to be doing both, regardless of if you want this to be your main population, because to work with children is to work with parents and caregivers. And so that brings its own challenges. But we'll get to that question in just a minute. I first also want to touch base with Kashel about what you find to be the most challenging aspect of the work you do.
So I have a few. First of all, I would just like to say I'm obsessed with what I do. Like I really love my job and I feel very lucky that I can wake up every day and I'm like, this is really what I get to do. So I want to start with that. I want to lean into that. But I'll say the challenges are I'm a deeply feeling, very like empathetic person. And we're told, and a lot of times you hear in society, like you leave your job at work, like you leave it at the office, right? But then you're really cultivating these relationships and you're showing up and you're very genuine. And I genuinely do very much care for each of the kiddos that I'm working with. And so there are times that I find it challenging when a kiddo is going through a really tough situation. And I find myself maybe like being at home and thinking about them or worrying about them. And so I have found, and we're going to talk about this later. I see that it's a question, but self-care, regulating, checking in with myself is extremely important for that piece because I do genuinely really care for them. And then also because I do genuinely care for them, sometimes their caregivers are doing things that are not helpful and and working with the parents. And that is why recently I have started leaning in harder to working with the parents and helping the families to connect because it's such an important healing piece for the clients that I work with. But yeah, so I would say that those are some things that are ongoing. And as we talked about before, we're constantly learning and we're constantly growing. So that's just something that I check in with and make sure that I am kind of having my checks and balances. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Kashel. I'm going to let Amanda move on to our next question, which is very related to what you both talked about.
Yes. So speaking of challenges, and I know Clark kind of mentioned working with family systems sometimes can be a challenge. And I know as a former school counselor myself, I felt like I always had, like, I felt like I could anticipate maybe or manage, better some of the challenges from my middle schoolers or high schoolers, but I wasn't always prepared, and often sometimes felt even kind of sideswiped by some of the responses or reactions from the parents or caregivers. And so I oftentimes felt, I guess, more challenged by the adults in the school system or the school stakeholders than I did than I did the students themselves. And so, over the years, is there anything that you have particularly learned how to work with parents, or tips, or just advice that you've learned to I guess build better relationships with your parents and caregivers, or things that you have done or set in place to help navigate that working relationship and partnership? And I'll start with you, Kishel.
So I often just remind them that this is a partnership, that we're both here for the same reason. And I let them know that I see them, I see their efforts. I try to lean in on strengths. Sometimes they're hard, okay, to find them, right? Especially if a parent is struggling. Um, but that really allows them to kind of check in with that part of themselves, and I find that that usually helps us to get on the same page, or in a similar, like maybe like close-ish page, that helps with the work that we do together. And I am a parent of three now, but even when I wasn't a parent, I would try to be empathetic to maybe like there's some situation, or how hard it must be, or how challenging that it must be. And so really focusing on also, like Kendall said, like really like you are building a relationship with a parent too. So if you're going to be working with children, you're also going to be working with their caregivers. And uh, so I that is how I approach them. And I'm also just, maybe it's my personality, but I'm not really scared of saying like, hey, I'm a child advocate, like I'm here for your kiddo. So if I'm going to share something with you, if I'm going to be telling you something, it's for the best interest of your child. And sometimes I found that that was hard as a school counselor, with at times like advocating with and having to deal with not necessarily caregivers, but more so administration. Um, and things like that. I found that challenging as a school counselor, because I'm not someone that's just going to be like quiet about something. If I see that there's something that is maybe harming a child or not benefiting them, I'm a huge child advocate. And so just like striking a balance and finding that building a relationship with someone initially, even if you are upset with them by how they're treating somebody that you care about, that's very important to take that approach.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. Clark, I'm going to give you a couple scenarios, if that's okay, because it seemed like oftentimes when working with parents, sometimes you get kind of two extremes. Sometimes you get a parent that's on the phone and they're very involved and want to be as involved as possible, and they want to know everything, and they want to know what was said in session, and they want to have your advice, and they're just kind of those frequent, they're kind of hovering around the whole process. And then sometimes you get parents that are very resistant. They don't understand why their child wants to come, or they don't understand why their child needs to come. And they're very, almost sometimes even maybe a little abrasive towards the process. So when you find yourself working with parents kind of or caregivers at those two different stages, can you give some advice for maybe either one of those, or maybe both of those scenarios?
Way to give me the most challenging question. Thanks, Amanda.
My apologies.
So what I was thinking about when you were bringing up the parents piece was, um, first of all, really, and I think Cashel spoke to this too, but making really clear at the very beginning, like a common understand, the informed consent piece of like, what is counseling? What is this relationship? How are you in this relationship with us? What is the purpose of our counseling sessions? And I find that sometimes, a lot of times, parents have had experiences where they don't have a very open, informed consent dialogue with that provider. So they don't really know what goes on in counseling. They think that they should be a part of every session, for example, like you're saying, um, or past therapist. Like we've had past therapists that do strange things. Sometimes you think about therapists that folks have worked with, right? And so parents have these expectations of what it could be, what it should be like. And I think so it's just making that really clear about what those roles are and about communication as well. So I find at first I was like, yeah, Clark, just you can email me whenever you want, parents. Text me at this number, at this, not my real number, but the, cover number. Now I realize that it's not okay because parents are going to take advantage. Certain parents could take advantage of that. So I really had to also establish clear boundaries of how, when, and how to communicate with me about said client, about said child. And so that is really helpful. One thing that I find with parents who maybe are not happy with therapy or not, or like they want it to go a certain way, it's not going that way. Or I think about an experience of, with a family I had where they wanted, particularly for me to focus on just like the mood disorder, like depression, and not explore or visit any topics related to gender, which is what this client was presenting with. Um, and so really invalidating their child's gender identity and exploration, saying, we don't want you to work on that or talk about that. Just please deal with the depression. And so I kind of had to, it was like in the moments, like figure out how I was going to advocate for the client and then share information about how there could be a connection, right? So we can't really separate. Maybe could be challenging to separate those items and do therapy in that way. That's really restrictive, and that's not how. So sometimes you have to kind of provide information, and it can be challenging. Unfortunately, with that family, for example, they did end up leaving the practice. They decided that that was not in their best interest with that client, and that's unfortunate. But yeah, I think the last piece I'll say about this is that when I find success with families and parents and guardians, it's um, and I've had to learn this, so that's why I'm sharing it, is really leaning into what's going on with them underneath. And so a parent might present with, I'm really angry about my child's identity or whatever it is. And really is what's underneath. Is it fear about their experience, their lived experience, their future, fear of disclosure to others in the family. So we have kind of honest conversations about some of those feelings, which really help parents. And then building that connection can strengthen the connection, and then thus, oftentimes helping the client as well. So I don't know. I touched on some of the topics, but you gave me like 4 questions. Okay.
I did. That was unfair of me. But you did wonderfully. Thank you. That was a great response. And what I loved hearing from you, um, was, even though that client walked away, that didn't stop you from doing your due diligence and doing and being an advocate for that child. And I think sometimes in the beginning when we're first starting out, that can be really difficult because we're trying to do what's right for the client, but we also may be trying to, appease the family as well and keep the client there. But you're exactly right. And that attitude of, like they chose to walk away, but that was their choice. And that didn't stop me from doing what I need to do as a child advocate. And that's a really hard thing to do, no matter at what stage of your practice you're at. But I think it's especially difficult in the beginning. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. And I do want to quickly just share with folks too that I did make sure, with this particular client that I was assessing for, are they going to be returning to a safe environment, so to speak? And while they were invalidated and their identity was invalidated, they had a somewhat safe environment to return to, and thus, they would be able to. They were functioning and hopefully would be able to explore their identity in the future. So, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding those pieces. And I think both of you spoke so beautifully to like the delicate balance that it is to both be a child advocate and have to work and navigate family factors, because there's so much cultural background within families, right? That sometimes we don't have the full context of. And sometimes that's also because the parents are not like fully aware of some of like the intricacies of their identities that they hold and like the intersectional pieces that make them who they are. And so sometimes it's things that like are aware to us and maybe not as aware even to the family. And so we're the ones bringing it to the forefront for the first time. And that can be an uncomfortable conversation. And at the end of the day, it's like, how do we lead with curiosity to continue to have difficult conversations that benefit the child, even if it ends up in them, seeking out another option. I always think of it like, at least I had the time that I had with that child, and hopefully it creates a space for them in the future where they're comfortable to come back to a therapeutic relationship. So I appreciate both of you sharing on that so beautifully. I think this kind of leads in beautifully to our next question also. And Clark, I know you spoke a little bit to this, and we're going to start with you, but can you talk to us about, to the level that you feel comfortable, of course, how you engage in self-care or wellness practices for yourself. And that can be in like how you set boundaries, but it can also just be in specific practices that you utilize that help to ground you or refocus you after doing the work that we do.
Yes. Yes. A journey it has been, right? So I think that like, am I perfect at self-care and wellness? No, it's something I work on all the time. And I'm always talking about it, with my own therapist as well, right? So it's something that I continue to work on. I think things that have been working well for me lately um, include, and this is not always possible, and this has been challenging, and especially like as Kashel was speaking to with our work and the empathic work that we do, it's very challenging. But what I tend to do is I tend to really shut down from all of work starting Friday, right after this. Is it Friday? Yeah, after this webinar. And I do not look at my computer. I do not answer texts from people that are work related. Sorry, Rachel. And I, wait till the following week. And I really had, that was a hard thing to do, to really disconnect. I would always be checking my phone. I would still be looking at emails. And so while it sounds silly, I just had to 100% disconnect. And it has been really life changing for me. So avoidance and disconnection and getting rid of my phone for a little bit. Put that thing down, people. Um, and so that is something, disconnection, and then engagement with other things outside of counseling and mental health. And so if you could see behind me, I have an exorbitant amount of plants unhealthily. And I know Kashel was speaking to their love for plants as well. Oh, look at that. I love the hanger. Um, and so, like that has become a hobby for me. Do I know what I'm doing? Sometimes they could grow. But I find it's like helpful for me. It's grounding. It's a source of fostering my wellness um, and it's okay if a plant dies. I'm learning that too. It's great to have plants across from you when you are in therapy as a metaphor as well. By the way, if anyone's looking for more metaphors about plants. So I think those are the few of the things. And then also I've really strengthened myself in leaning into other people and asking for help, or saying like, I'm not doing okay today. I'm having a crappy day, or those types of things that I feel like just for myself, there's a stigma of like, well, as a helping professional, you should be able to cope through these things or handle things or whatever it might be that I'm telling myself. And to, really just lean into my community and be okay, not being okay sometimes, um, even as a professional, whatever that means. So those are a few things that come to mind for me. And it's something that I think I'm still exploring as I grow.
Such great suggestions and advice, especially in that piece of just like kind of figuring out as we go and being transparent in our need for help and assistance. I think like early on, that was something I was so turned off to, this idea of like, I'm the mental health professional. Like I cannot ask other people for help. And like how much my professional relationships, even with people that I like worked with in clinical settings, changed when I became more open to that. Like it changed my view on, I feel like, being a therapist and connecting with other therapists. So I love that advice. And Kashel's great at that. I get the beauty of like working with her in a clinical space, for those of you that don't know. So I get to use her as like my, please help me. Everything is falling to the ground. I need somebody to hold it up for me. But I know Kashel engages in a lot of wellness practice as well. So I want to throw it over to you to share with us a little bit about that.
So it has also been a journey for me. So Clark, I'm very glad that you just mentioned that because it's true. And that also kind of allows some grace for ourselves. Like this can change. Um, I would say one of the biggest pieces is setting boundaries. Um, Clear communication, setting boundaries. I will not answer emails or texts after a certain time. Actually, just recently, I'm like, I am no longer accepting text because I am trying to centralize my communication. And that's something I'm very proud of, and that has been very helpful. So setting clear boundaries and holding those. I love what was just said about the weekend, like really utilizing my evenings and my weekend with my own children, with my own family for my own time. When I leave the office too, I tell myself, especially if it was like a kiddo was really struggling with something, that I value our time together and that I hope that the relationship that we have and the things that they've been working on are helpful, but that also they've got this. And then I play some music really loud because I like to jam out in my car. And if I'm at home, sometimes I'll like play music at my house and I'll dance in the kitchen with my kids because it's freaking fun and it helps my nervous system. And then I make sure that I lean into people. I love my coworkers so much. I love being reminded that sometimes, like, we do have hard days, and even though we are the mental health professionals, that sometimes we struggle too. And I do find that that's helpful when you bring that up in session. I know that's not answering this current question, but like letting kiddos know you're a human, and sometimes we have tough days. And I would just say like yoga and meditation have pretty much saved my life. I find that it helps me to like tune into my mind, my body, really check in with myself, be more self-aware, and that's really helpful too. And having my own therapist, she's awesome. Um, so all of those things are really important. But I love that we talked about boundaries because that's one that I think I've been on a journey with that is so incredibly healthy and helpful in this profession and absolutely necessary. And getting comfortable with that also helps model that for our clients that we're working with so that they can then in turn go out and set healthy boundaries for themselves.
Thank you so much for that. I also just want to point out to all the students on the call today that these self-care strategies and practice that both Clark and Cashel engage in are so intentional. And so I think sometimes we can get caught up in like the surface level of what self-care like might look like in the media, social media, that kind of thing. And while those things are fun and cute and important, right? It's always nice to have a bubble bath or do those things that engage in some self-care practice. It can also be like a really intentional focused thing that you do, like setting better boundaries, like saying I'm not answering emails after this time, like even setting really intentional work hours because that benefits you and your family. So I think all of those things are self-care practices. They're just not things that we discuss as often. And those tend to be the things that we have to be quite intentional in implementing. So I appreciate both of you sharing about that. It's something that's near and dear to my heart.
Can
Amanda.
I add one thing?
Oh yeah.
I just loved what Cashel said, and it made me think about recently I learned this. So I wanted to share again. I love sharing things that I learn in my brain. And it is that you can say things like, if someone says, "Hey, can come out and do this thing?" You can say, "No, not today." And that's all you need to say. You don't have to have a reason, and you don't need to freak yourself out in your head that they're going to hate you. So I'm really working on like firm, clear communication. And so Cashel, that made me think about that. So win for us. Yay.
Love that.
Learning the word no is really important, and that's hard to do. It takes time. But I think also what you were saying earlier, Clark, about being confident in yourself. I think sometimes in knowing who you are as an individual and knowing that you're enough, I think you have to get to that point, I think, before often you can embrace better boundaries and learning the word no and things like that. So it definitely is a journey and process that sounds like you both have worked through to get to this point to be able to embrace those things. I used to tell my students all the time about time sets that I was at like a bank, think to yourself, if the bank is closed, then I'm closed. But just recently, I had a student tell me that they had never written a check and they'd never been to a bank. And so that didn't make sense to them. And so I'm like, apparently, I'm going to have to come up with something else that's no longer applicable to current students. It's 24-hour banking. So now I'm going to have to come up with something else because that's setting really bad boundaries for myself. But anyway, we'll jump to our final question. Kids are adolescents, they're going through a lot these days, especially post-COVID. There's a lot of issues that they are faced with on a daily basis. Based upon your current engagement with your clients and their families, at this time, what do you feel is maybe one or two of the most pertinent issues that you're seeing in the field right now that your clients are facing? And Kisha, I'll start with you.
I have to say, I feel like that's a very it's a loaded question because each of my kiddos are so different and they're kind of facing different things. But I would say like connection, feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling understood. I know, especially I think about my teens, feeling lonely, feeling like pressure from all the things that they have to do with school, academics, the challenges of navigating social life, and then them just kind of like shutting down because it's just too much. And social media definitely plays a part of that with my teens that I work with. That it's negatively impacting them, like spending like really long periods of time on their phone and then trying to work with me like I don't want to do this, but I'm doing this. And then I'd also just say what's also going on in the world, and like not just in our country, but in the world, it like has an impact on a lot of the clients that I'm working with and helping them to see that also plays a role in all these other pieces and things that are going on. But yeah, I don't know if that really truly answered your question, but
No, it did. Thank you. I appreciate that response. Clark, we'll jump over to you and see if there's any, and maybe the better word is, are there certain like trending or common themes that you're seeing across clients at this time?
Yes. And um, I think more specifically because of the client population I see, um, I really um, think that the issues are pertinent to like every day, like what's going on right now. So, our queer and trans youth are. I'm thinking about, like, to give you a lived experience. I'm thinking about a client, coming in and kind of asking just right out to me, what are we going to do if this law is passed? What are we going to do? And like for the first time, not really having any answers, not knowing what to say, a really empty feeling. So these pieces of legislature and kind of like just big broader pieces of what they're seeing in society, and kind of what Kashal was speaking to, like the socio-political stuff and media, and those messages are really harming youth and adolescents. And so they're coming to counseling. And oftentimes I find myself doing counseling. It is a lot of affirmative counseling, which takes into these tenets of like, you're okay who you are. Society and the world, it sucks. And so, but you're okay. You are who you are. And that's beautiful. And so I feel like that's a lot of my work right now, is like, helping youth and helping non-dominant populations of youth get through kind of the world right now, society, and the messages they're receiving. So I think that also speaks to the need for, so that's why we're all here, right? And the need for um, counseling training and counselors and emerging professionals to uh, really cultivate affirming like culturally responsive and trauma-informed practices that we're using with kiddos and clients so that we're not perpetuating harm to marginalized groups or non-dominant groups. Um, so I think that's I'm going to step down from the soapbox now.
I am appreciative of your soapbox. I think that both of you spoke to some really like pertinent issues. I think to speak to Cashel's point a little more too, just like in my own clinical practice, watching the world and children transition out of like a post-COVID kind of space and back into spaces where there's lots of like social connections and opportunities. I've seen like children really struggling with what that looks like and being overwhelmed with the need that others have to connect and communicate with them and like not knowing what exactly that's supposed to look like. And so a lot of children feeling like a lot of guilt and shame about their struggles with connecting with other children or like feeling like they don't have a place or like that their identity isn't seen. And so I think that that is something that like Clark spoke so well to also, and just validating that they are who they are and that identity is always going to be enough. Even if it's not always supported in the spaces that they exist within, like how we can help them to build that internal resilience and self-worth, that they see themselves as people that are worthy of like love and care and connection with others. And that is like a really hard part of this work too. It's so draining to see that, I think, in anyone and especially in children. That's like a point for me that's always been so difficult. And so I think you both spoke so beautifully to like how we're navigating some really challenging times working with children, but also like in a very challenging socio-political context and space. And, you know, I'm thinking about where that takes us globally, like with global issues that are going on and all the things that are happening in our world, like where that takes us with our work with kids in the future, I think is something to be really mindful of. And this is why you have professional connections and networking opportunities so that you can meet with wonderful people like Clark and Cashel who are doing this type of work and, you know, have the mind for how we work through some of these challenging things. So not to be super downer because that was kind of sad and hard and just points to the work that we do as people, but we would love to end with some questions that were pulled from the Google form. And I think that some of them are kind of interesting or fun. One of them really speaks to development, and I think we've talked a bit about this, but I think it also speaks to development from a kind of beginning counselor to maybe a more mid-career or more like seasoned professional. I would love to hear from each of you how your approach to working with child and adolescent populations has shifted over the course of your career. So I know both of you also started as school counselors, so you can even speak some to like what that transition into clinical, more like clinical mental health looked like for you. Or you can also just speak to what it means to move from being a brand new beginning counselor to somebody who has some years of experience under their belt. And I don't remember who we started with last. Only two of you. But we can start with Clark this time.
Thank you. How has my approach shifted over the course of my career? Well, I think that I'm modeling it right now. I think that I have slowed down a lot. So I think that I have prioritized relationship building and connection um, over interventions and like trying to. I remember like making copies from like a treatment planner book and like frantically looking through the right treatment and thinking to myself like this can't be it, right? Like so at one point, right? So and to come to a place now where it's not really like I'm thinking about the intervention, it's more about that relationship. So I think that's one thing that has shifted for me. Um, also the second thing, reminder about the family. Like family's important. It's a part of the work. How do you do it? Um, it's challenging. It's rewarding. Um, yeah. So I think, and then also, uh, this came with the relational work, but trusting my clients and really just like allowing them to be the experts, right, of their own lives. And I think that, of course, I could say that when I first started counseling, but I don't think that's really what I was doing. And so, really, really trying to instill that now as I work. I think that's how I've changed. I can't wait to see how I change in the next 10 years.
No, but I love that. I love that. I feel like I'm a broken record of the therapeutic relationship is the is the most important tool that we have. And we sometimes are like so quick to pull in other interventions, and a lot of times it just comes back to being connected, slowing down. Kishelle.
Yeah, so I mean, pretty big shift going from school counselor to private practice. In some ways, yes, sometimes some ways no. Um, I would say, I miss that community piece from being a school counselor. That definitely was very lovely. And I miss like the psychoeducational pieces of like going into the class and like helping them to build skills that I knew that they could like go out and use. Um, but I actually I'm doing that like every single day with my clients too. I'm trying to think. I mean, I think the biggest way that I shifted in my work that I do is leaning in a lot harder, like I said before, to helping parents learn how to co-regulate with their kids, helping parents learn how to validate their kids' feelings. And typically now what I do is before I take on a kiddo, now in my little 10-minute phone consult, I'm like, hey, this is who I am. This is how I show up as a therapist. If you're willing to do the work with me, I am going to have you work with me as well, because I cannot just like work with your kiddo in a vacuum. It won't be helpful for them. And I think that's a way that I have really shifted, and I find that is extremely beneficial for kiddos. And I'm very upfront with them, with the kids too, because I know there's confidentiality and the therapeutic relationship. But I do it in a way that lets them know, like, hey, I am in your corner. I am here for you. I am your advocate, and I always ask for permission first from the kiddo before I ever share anything with parents. Like I check in with them. Sometimes we role play. Sometimes the kid will, I'll be like, do you want to share this info? And then we'll role play it together. And sometimes I'll empower them to do it themselves, which is really great. But I think that's the biggest way that I've shifted. I've always been really big. I think I show up authentically from day one. I'm a relationship person. I'm like, let's just like, really get to know each other. And because I feel like kids just see through the BS immediately. I hope I can say BS on this panel. That's who I am. So, I'm just very genuine with kids and show them like, hey, this is who I am, and build a relationship with them. But I realized that if I don't do that work, the necessary work with the parents, that therapeutically, I'm not going to see it nearly as much progress for them as when I'm like working with everybody together and working with the parents.
Thank you so much, Kishelle. We had thoughts about another question, but I think maybe the best thing to do with the remaining time we have is one piece of advice that you have for the students that are on this call. And it can be about working with child and adolescent populations, or it can be about just them growing in their counselor identity. We have, I know, both master's level and doctoral level students on the call today. But this panel is really focused on clinical work. So any kind of piece of advice that you have around clinical work, and then after that, I'll close us out. And we will start with Kishelle.
I'm gonna say it's such an important role that we play, and I think that it's lovely what we do, not just for these individuals, but for society, right? Because we're helping these kids to learn and grow and utilize these skills in their life, and then they are then therefore sharing and doing these things with others, right? It's very profound, the work that we do. So my advice would be like self-love, like give yourself some love, be confident, be proud about what you're doing, and know that the work that you're doing is so incredibly important. And don't tilt that too far to the side of like, putting too much pressure on yourself, but more so like being proud of what it is that you're showing up and that you're doing, and being okay, like learn to be okay with making mistakes, because it will happen. Like we are not, we're not perfect just because we're the mental health professionals. Like there's things that we're going to do that maybe like, oh, I could have done that better. And then you show up and you let your kiddo know, like, hey, I thought about that, like, and do the repair work, like not just with yourself, but then, also in situations where if you make a mistake, forgive yourself and move forward. I know that was a lot that I just named, but I think those pieces are really important in the work that we do.
Yeah, so helpful. Thank you, Michelle. Clark?
Besides, be authentic, number one, above all. I would say, um, you know, being humble in the piece of never stop learning and growing. Um, you should always kind of have the attitude of that, like that you want to learn more, that you don't know enough, specifically related to like, cultural humility and learning about expanding our knowledge of cultural humility. I think that's really important. And it takes a lot of um, self-awareness too. So I guess another piece would be like do your own work, which is also sometimes leaning into discomfort, leaning into uncomfortable stuff, whether that's like facing your own stuff, oh, talking to the counselor about it, doing stuff in your life that change, whatever that might be. You might have to do some work on yourself. And so leaning into some of that discomfort can be healthy. You come out on the other side, I promise. Um, and yeah, I can't wrap that up with a bow, but I'm sure you can. Someone else can.
I was, thank you so much for saying that. That's actually really important. And I guess part of like what I was saying, like being able to admit when you like make a mistake, but like we are always constantly learning and growing and having that mindset like forever in this industry, because like literally things are constantly moving and changing too as well, right? So I love that you just shared that and had to jump in, because being a forever learner, like we talked about before, is necessary.
Mhm. Absolutely. I appreciate the advice and the time that you both have taken today out of your busy schedules to be here with us and to provide just a level of experience to the students that are on the call today. Students, I hope that you gain some level of understanding and also some excitement about the work that we get to do. Clark has put his email in the thread, which is very nice. If we Cashel, if you want to do that, feel free, but also no pressure. You do not have to do that. But we are so grateful that both of you took the time to be here today. And for students, just as a heads up, we have started to move these professional development panels to have one in the fall and one in the spring. So our fall one this year was actually focused on clinical issues. Our spring panel will be focused more on research and potential movement through like the research process. And if you're interested in going into like doctoral programs, academia, that kind of thing, that is going to be the focus of our spring panel. So please keep an eye out for the sign up for that. We would love to have you all back if you're interested in that. And we would love to also have you be really involved in the Association for Child and Adolescent Counseling. So if you are looking to get more involved in that in any sort of way, feel free to reach out to us. I can throw the email for the Emerging Leaders Program in the chat. We will be looking and sending out applications for new emerging leaders in the spring of next year. If you're interested in learning more about that program, feel free to reach out to us. But again, we all appreciate your time today. We hope that you were able to gain something from this process, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you, Kendall. I'm gonna hop over to the other one and start with the
Yes.
emails on the conference proposal.
Okay. Are you okay with me, are you okay with me not being at that meeting?
I
Okay.
got it.
And I will follow up with you about it. I think that there was 4 of our 6 on the call.
Okay.
So
Let
Yeah,
me
there was
know
one
if
or two that couldn't make it.
Yeah.
Just let me know what you guys need from me. Whenever.
Yes, we will. I thought it went really well. They
I
were
thought it was too.
fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know what happened to Amy. She didn't respond to any of my texts. I hope she's okay.
Hope
That's
she's
really not
okay.
like her. So I don't
Okay.
know. I'll let you know if I hear from her.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's okay. And also I think our plan to split them, oh gosh, that made so much more sense. I felt like we weren't trying to tackle two beasts. It was just like we can focus on this one thing. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
it worked good. Okay, I'll let y'all know how the meeting
yeah.
goes afterwards.
Good
Okay.
luck.
Bye.
Bye.